This video is brought to you by Squarespace.
Culture.
I've always loved me a little bit of travelling. And there is a moment that happens every single time, right? After I've been sat out in the streets drinking my red wine, and you come back, right? And you land in Luton Airport, and you find yourself sat in a Starbucks with a sticky table, and you sit there and you wonder to yourself, what happened to our culture?
Things that drive me insane in England. Every time you come to a pub, restaurant, cafe, I don't know what it is, but they're always so dirty.
I mean, like, our food, our fashion, our service quality. To me, sometimes it just feels a little bit low. Don't get me wrong, now and then we still drop bangers. There are some very cool places in the UK, but I do feel that for a large chunk of Britain, our culture sometimes seems either very low quality or just stuck in the past. It just seems that our country has stopped trying to progress. We've lost our imagination of what the future could look like. So today we will explore the weird stagnation of British culture.
Thank you for having me. I do hope you're having a lovely jubilee. Tea?
For a long period of time, British culture was largely split between kind of like two classes of people. You had your fancy pants aristocracy, and they kind of lived sort of in this French-inspired way. Their culture was largely just displays of opulence, status, and wealth. Even things like afternoon tea. The part of the thing was showing that you could afford to import tea from China. And then you had like the poors, right? The paupers. And their culture was largely just sort of seeing what the aristocrats were doing and then finding cheap ways of doing it themselves. 3-hour afternoon teas were replaced with, a 5-minute cuppa. Something to keep you going whilst you're toiling in the mines and trying to avoid cholera. The pub pretty much spawned out of the fact that heating your own home just cost too much money. So you went to a public home instead. The culture of the British working class for a long period of time was largely just small, tiny moments of respite between hard, physical, brutal labour. But you see, things would change, right? There would be 2 periods of time that would really leave a lasting impact on British culture that we still see today. Firstly, it is, of course, that industrial era. You see, British people lived very different lives when we were sort of agricultural. In agricultural Britain, life was measured by seasons, sunlight, good harvest. You worked with nature's rhythm from dawn till dusk, sowing and reaping. And when it rained, you rested.
You see that? It's made of chicken. It's actually made of chicken. You kill it, you got free chicken. You can sell it to people.
And like in the agricultural era, there was lots of traditions like festivals, markets and holy days that gave entire villages and communities downtime to enjoy and socialise together.
God speed the plough!
Look, I'm not saying that life wasn't grueling and tough there and very unfair. I know it was. But it is true that culture and celebration was a core part of their existence. However, when the Industrial Revolution came, they said, fuck all that, right? Time is money. Britain became very, utilitarian. You can see it in our food. There are lots of old traditional dishes in British culture that kind of aren't eaten anymore. And a lot of our cuisine was shaped by the industrial era. Cuisine, like the literal food you were eating, was increasingly being tailored to maximize output. High calorie, simple dishes, pies, things like pasties were literally designed so that you could stick them in your pocket whilst you're down in the mine and you had something to scoff on. And the second very important era that affected our cuisine was World War II. Right after World War II, Britain went into a period of rationing and austerity. And so our cuisine became even more utilitarian. This is where you start seeing the rise of like beans on toast. I love it, right? Bang some cheese on it, a bit of Worcestershire sauce, great. But let's not pretend that it's the height of fine dining, right? However, right, in this same period of time, things in much of Europe were a little bit different.
The island of Sicily, where you eat at communal tables in the open air, and of course in the sun.
Right, sure, a lot of Europe obviously industrialized. They too went down this route, but because of maybe more land, they managed to hold on to their sort of agricultural living a little bit longer. It's like the typical trope, right, of like Southern Europeans living these very slow-paced lifestyles, drinking wine, eating local produce from their local markets, your mum in the kitchen all day cooking one simple dish of spaghetti, right? This was the good life, high quality cuisine, time spent connected with the family. And I would say, right, it was this pressure that was happening in Britain, this disconnection of a genuine social life for, you know, the more industrialized parts of Britain, that led to a cultural revolution.
The first time the public noticed mods and rockers coming to blows was Easter Bank Holiday in 1964 at Clacton.
How serious was this disturbance at the weekend? Was it in fact a gang fight?
Not as far as we know. It was several hundred young people, rather at a loose end over the weekend.
Were you and your friends mods or rockers?
Well, we're mods when we're dressed up, you know. Mods!
What caused all this trouble yesterday?
Boredom.
All right, so you gotta imagine, right? After the war, you get a whole new generation of kids, young blood. And these lot, you know, they grow up in this kind of like grey era, the wreckage of the war. And this generation were raised by very strict Victorian parents. You know, the reserve, the stiff upper lip. Can you blame them? I mean, they lived through literally the Great Depression and the Blitz. And when they were suffering through this post-traumatic stress, the doctor would just call it a case of the jelly legs. So yeah, they were a little bit strict, you know, maybe they might harsh your vibe a bit. But these kids, right, they grew up in a weird period of time, right? After the war, the increased state spending, the universal healthcare, high wages, the welfare state, and an increased amount of free time. All of these things started to create this unique period of time, right? The period of time between being a child and an adult. This created what was called youth culture.
You kids, get off my lawn.
Previously, right, there was no such thing as being a youth, right? Age 12, you were chucked down a mine and you were basically a full adult at that point. But you know, now thanks to a little thing called labor laws, as well as universal education, the young bros, they were chilling big time. Suddenly, these youths had just time on their hands and they started to have a bit of spending money. And what would you do, right? You and your mates, you got nothing to do, you got all the time in the world, you got some money in your pocket. Naturally, you swag the fuck out. You start flexing on them bitches, the mods. Before we go any further with this video, I want to give a massive shout out to today's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the #1 platform for building your own custom, beautiful, amazing website. For me, the best bit is the cutting edge design tools. By using their Blueprint AI, anyone can have a perfectly customized and bespoke website. You can just tell the AI what your industry is, what your goals are for the website, and it will create a personally designed website filled with content and an amazing looking design. And from their award-winning templates, you can just pick and choose any of the designs that you like and really make your website stand out. A massive part of businesses these days is having an email marketing list so that you can send out things like product updates and events, etc. Squarespace allows you to make them as well as managing them and sending them out. Literally any time in the past that I've needed to make a website, I've always used Squarespace. It's simple, easy to use, and enjoyable. So be sure to head to squarespace.com to start your free trial. And when you're ready to launch the website, go to squarespace.com/Jimmy the Giant to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Anyway, back to the video.
A mod, well, comes up. Wears a suit, wears a tie, wears a collar. Latest hairstyle, latest fashions. Goes to the latest dancing, learns the latest dancing. Just likes to be modern, a mod.
Short for modernists, the mods were a subculture that were heavily influenced by the lives of people living in Southern Europe. Like, they were literally adopting the look, you know, Italian slick suits, sharp hair, whipping around on Vespers, sipping au café at the espresso bar. Now you gotta remember, right, in this period of time, this is way before fast fashion, right? No Primark, there's no ASOS. Back then, if you wanted some nice fashionable coat, you had to go and wait for it, find the place that sold it, and get it tailored to fit your cute little bod. After you saved up for some high quality leather shoes and there was a problem with them, you wouldn't throw them away, you'd get them fixed down at your local cobbler. This was a period of time, right, before planned obsolescence, right? Things back then were built to last. As well, in this time, there was this new phenomena of Italian cafes in Britain.
In London's West End, coffee shops do represent competition for the pubs. Typical are these 3 new Park Lane coffee bars, which already are a success.
When the coffee bar, which came into being in London just after the war, there was something ideal for the teenagers. The atmosphere was right, decor right, they could have music, they could sit down, have a cup of coffee for a few coppers. Everything was right for the teenager. It's a sort of club, a meeting place for them, absolutely made for them.
Beforehand, for the working class, this really wasn't a thing. I mean, yeah, you would have like tea rooms where truckers might go to, but it was more a work break than a place to just hang out for the sake of it. Espresso bars weren't functional. They weren't there as a break from work. They were a place to be, to socialize and hang out. And so as this new culture was forming, so too was a new rebellious sound of music. The Who, the Jam. This music really reflected the period of time. It's so interesting listening to the lyrics that clearly represent like a young working class Brit trying to find this new identity that was separate to the old, very punishing, strict Victorian mindset. The mindset that their parents grew up with. I mean, they literally had a song called My Generation. People try to put us down, talking about my generation. I hope I die before I get old. Talking about me. Yeah, you get the fucking idea. But you see, what made the mods unique, right? And it wasn't just a rip-off of like Italian culture. They were emulating the lives lived by, you know, wealthy socialites in Southern Europe in cold, gloomy, industrial Britain. And it's that really made it unique, right? It was combining this refined, polished look with like a rebellious, gritty attitude. Like they would be dressed to the fucking nines, meanwhile they're going out fighting rockers, swearing at their parents, taking amphetamines and just having it fucking large.
At Whitsun and in August, the TV cameras and the police were ready. The battles were smaller than at Clacton, but got much wider coverage.
But you see, the mods, they proved something, right? They proved that Britain, with its old, very traditional culture, could reinvent itself. It could take elements of Britishness and bring it into the present day. And then, big old business boys started sniffing around. Beatles, Carnaby Street, swinging London. Very quickly, this turned into a consumer frenzy.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is London. Swinging London, it's been called, though some people might find a different adjective. Social rebels have taken over in what seems more like an invasion than a revolution, because they've got their own new language that is way out and weird, to say the least.
Major fashion outlets started to get behind these youth culture movements, and these movements would become increasingly commercialized. Eventually, what was dubbed the British invasion goes global.
British bands arrived en masse. Rock and roll was suddenly tribal.
Herman's Hermits, the Beatles, Dave Clark 5, Bamford Man. All of a sudden, very few American artists are getting the play.
Now you had young people in America trying to be like Liverpudlians in Britain. Each of these new organic youth-led movements that were springing up became opportunities for big business. And from here, over time, what it did was create this cycle. The young people would create something new and unique. The big old business boys would see it, take it, commercialize it, make it very mainstream, and then the next generation would see that and they would reject it because it became so mainstream, and they would create something new again. From the mods to the hippies, the skinheads, the new romantics to Britpop, goths, emos, chavs, each time it was born, it would get packaged up and sold back to the masses. And you know, I say that, right? And I can sound nihilistic, but at the end of the day, it still was culture. It still was organic. It presented a lifestyle for people, a means to enjoy themselves, hang out with people like them, and create an identity for themselves. But you see, this increasing commercialization that we were seeing with these subcultures was really a reflection of something deeper that was happening in Britain. From the 70s, 80s onwards, Britain was becoming more and more corporate, capitalistic, individualized, and very fucking Americanized.
Hello again and welcome to another News Round Extra. Today we're going to look at the latest burger boom. It's just beginning and it's a battle for the money that you spend when you pop out for a meal. It's a multi-million pound gamble. The burger barons are about to spend over £40 million this year on getting you and your families into what they call fast food centres. But for this massive investment to pay off, you've got to change the way you eat.
I'm sorry, Americans, you're all right, but can you we don't need so many McDonald's. Around the 60s to 80s, right, Britain really was presented with a choice, a blue pill and red pill moment, of which pathway it wanted to take into its future. And if you look at the things like the mods, there was a brief moment where it looked like Britain might go the way of Europe. Maybe we might embrace that sort of slower paced lifestyle. The more social lifestyle that's found in the side streets of Nice, the piazzas of Florence, or the canal boats of Amsterdam. Cafe culture, conversation, design, art, leisure. A culture built on living well instead of just working hard. But yeah, now we said fuck that, and we just took in the Temu slop. Corporate slops on the menu today, boys. There's an interesting moment in history, right? 1963, where the French president Charles de Gaulle, he vetoed Britain's membership in what was the original formation of the EU.
The meeting of the Common Market Commission in Brussels is in the nature of a wake for Britain's hopes of joining the nations on the continent in a unified economic front. But France and de Gaulle turned thumbs down.
And they did so because they feared that Britain would be a Trojan horse for American interests. And they weren't wrong. They weren't wrong. Britain really did succumb in a very full-on way to American capitalism. An obsession over efficiency, scale, and profit. You see, whilst Europe and Britain were building out welfare states and looking after workers, America really fucking lagged behind. Especially on workers' rights, universal healthcare, obviously, paid leave, unemployment benefits, and unionization. America at the time was doing some things for the workers, but generally they were focused more on making people work harder and harder and earn more and more to turn individuals into fuel for the machine of capitalism. And yeah, unfortunately, we started to align more with that kind of attitude, right? Over time, the British family-run cafes were increasingly losing against the sprawl of franchise Starbucks. Instead of building nice, beautiful piazzas, we were building retail parks that looked like this. Which one hurts you more emotionally? We made less and less public trams, and we opted more and more for individual car ownership, less and less locally sourced organic foods, and more American fast food chains. From an economic standpoint, we started to look at it like, why have a 2-hour midday meal with your family when you could grab a meal deal from Greg's, scoff it in 5 minutes, and get back to the fucking meat grinder? I don't know if you've seen these videos on TikTok, the whole my 5 till 9 before my 9 till 5. I mean, it's just, it is so depressing, but that desperation for some kind of life outside of work is a pure product of this process that Britain went under. Now, look, of course, I don't want to romanticize Europe. You know, it's a massive place with different attitudes, and obviously these influences do affect much of Europe also. But I do think it is notable how, compared to Europe, just how little Britain has done to try and fight it.
Is Oxford Street in London, Britain's top place to go shopping, and amidst all the smart stores, the newest sort of place to eat. Fast food centres like this are just starting to spring up on high streets all over the country. Rival firms are spending millions battling for the best, most expensive sites, and younger customers are one of their main targets. You can make or break this revolution. In the burger boom, the gamble is that Britain will go for fast food in a big way, with its quick service, tasty meals, lack of fuss, and clean, smart surroundings.
You got to think, right, as more working people, middle-class people had more money, this market of cultural activities opened up, right? The more money and free time you had, the more things you could do in that time, and that created a market opportunity to sell you stuff to fill that time with. And that's good, right? Having money and leisure hours to make a market built around purely enjoyment. But when left unchecked, over a long period of time, this incentive to keep increasing profit will naturally affect the quality and depth of those cultural activities. I would say in Britain, I notice it a lot in clothing, food, and service standards. Now, I want to preface this, I'm not saying that Britain doesn't do any of those things very well. We do, but I'll get onto that a bit later. However, I'd say our general bar feels a little bit lower, especially when you go around Europe. So if you think about what has kind of happened economically over the last 50 or so years, a massive change was the rise of mass production, especially in clothing. So fast fashion comes along. We find new ways to make clothes more affordable. We do this by making it much more disposable. Instead of spending money on good quality fabrics, we would go for thinner, cheaper fabrics. Instead of stitching the sole to the shoe, maybe they would glue it. As we started to increasingly rely on cheap materials like polyester, we could pump out lots of clothes for very cheap. Admittedly, because we were using sweatshop labor in China, but don't worry about that. So it became very easy if there were new trends emerging, say like skater kids started to wear some new style clothes or something. 1 week later, you'll find a cheap spin-off in Primark. These massive clothing companies started to grow, and the accessibleness of cheap, low-quality clothing grew massively. Primark comes along. You start seeing supermarkets, Asda, Tesco making clothes that, because of scale and efficiency, started to squeeze all the local producers. And because they became so big, they created a market that opted towards low-quality and cheap items as opposed to higher price but more durable, high-quality items. And I know people are going to say, well, that's good because, people who are poor can afford it, but it's not like people in the past, the working class in the olden days, used to just run around naked. No, individual items might cost them more money, but they were much better quality and they would last for longer. Equally, those people would look after their items of clothing by getting them fixed at a tailor or cobbler. There's no way of me really proving this, but I could imagine that now people are just more likely to spend more money on lower quality items because they have to keep replacing them. And there's been a very similar process with cafes. The high quality mod espresso bar gets out-competed by those franchise Starbucks, whose selling point isn't quality and how good the bean is and the barista. No, it's what combo of sugar and cream can they pump into the drink to mask the taste of cheap burnt coffee.
What do you guys want?
Let me get a fratte motete. And then let me get a Trenta pinkety drinkety.
Drinkety pinkety dinky and a fratte mate.
And the establishments themselves aren't built to make, beautiful third places where you want to hang out and be. The objective is to locate them in the perfect zones just close enough to the office so when you get your 30 minutes caffeine fix, you opt for them because they're close. Increasingly with food culture in Britain, you see it overrun by fast food. All this Americanized stuff, this sort of fried chicken, burgers, pizzas, they dominate the high street. Even if we're going to be honest, even Greg's is just greasy, low quality slop designed to just be picked up and ate on the go, not sat down and enjoyed just fucking fast. Quite different to the perfectly crafted croissant that you have to wake up at 7 a.m. to get a fresh one before they're sold out. It just gets out competed by a machine that with one click of a button, it will shit a McFlurry into a cup for you. And here's the thing, right? I'm not going to act like fast food isn't nice. I obviously enjoy, the Greg's pizzas are all right. Big Macs are pretty nice on a hangover. And it's okay to like these things. And it's okay that we have these choices to eat them. But my problem is how it's forced upon us economically. These big, massive fast food chains have a particularly unfair economic advantage that outmuscle all of the small, local, independent, family-run businesses. And these chains, when they get so big, they end up driving down the quality of the entire British service industry.
The difficulty with doing specialty beans in a low traffic shop is that every day you still need to double check and redial in the beans if you want to make the best espresso you can. So it was either raise those costs or have slightly worse coffee, aka break my quality promise, which is something I did not want to do.
Now, I have noticed, right, again, from traveling a lot, but also from speaking with tourists and speaking with immigrants to this country, that Britain seems to be uniquely bad at, service. Unattentive service staff, sticky tables, and unclean toilets aren't uncommon. And this is simply because we have created an economy that makes high quality very uncompetitive. High business rates plus high commercial rent plus VAT on hospitality means that profit margins are razor thin. And when you've got this domination of these big businesses, when they want to increase profits, what they do is cut costs on things like cleaners, on the staff headcount, fewer waiters, fewer waitresses, and they increase a reliance on machine automation, making you literally do the service for yourself. And I think years and years of this kind of cheap and cheerful thing in Britain has managed to reset expectations of the British customer base. I feel like we have kind of learnt to accept shit quality. And I always wonder, why do these businesses survive? Why does it not lose them customers? And I realize it is honestly because of the scale of them. The scale alone, that power allows them to dominate high streets.
Well, I would think that by the mid-80s, every high street in Britain will have 2 or 3 stores like this sort of thing, fast counter service. It's going to be a real battle. It'll be those that spend the money on advertising, give good service and good products that actually win at the end.
And what about the cost of the hamburgers? Is that going to go up?
If anything is going to go down, we're taking a supermarket approach, sort of stack it high, sell it cheap.
And these businesses don't become so big because of great quality. These businesses, these chains are so incredibly big that they play the game completely differently. Many of these large chains, like if you take something like a McDonald's, they were able to build themselves up so big in America that when they came here, they had the wealth to just bulldoze the entire market. Vast amounts of capital and access to credit that they could dominate high streets. Like, think about it, they literally have so much money that it's very easy for them to outbid all of the competition on the most prime retail spots. Like, if you're a small family business trying to get a loan to start up a restaurant and you're trying to compete against McDonald's are definitely good for the money. They're going to be a much more reliable tenant. Or if I'm not mistaken about McDonald's, I believe they actually just purchased the place themselves. They own so much property. So once they're in that prime location, especially if it's a very business orientated, work heavy area, they then focus making their product speedy and cheap, which is great for people who are in a rush. And if you're in an economy where people have less and less free time and they work busier and busier lives, that starts winning in the market. And add on top of that, with this inordinate wealth that they have, they can afford global marketing budgets. These marketing budgets aren't done for no reason. They are done because they influence your purchasing decisions. And so when you're seeing your whole high street dominated by this, these businesses, as they start to increase their profits, can lower and lower their service quality, increase automation. And because at the end of the day, their customers just want a cheap, quick, easy, fast meal, the small, high quality family run restaurant can really struggle to compete against that. So then their profit margins get smaller and smaller, and they have to make a decision. Do they do the really high quality thing? Do they employ the right amount of staff? Or do they just accept that they also need to lower their service standards in order to compete with these massive chains? And I think this is what has this kind of overall degrading effect on the quality of British culture. And I sometimes wonder, does this sort of general decaying and accepting of low standards, does it condition the British people to kind of accept mediocrity from life? So just having lower standards, we accept that, we don't deserve anything more. We know if we want to complain to Nando's, who the fuck's going to listen? The manager can't do anything. Maybe if you're lucky and you can be bothered to write to head office, you get a coupon for a half chicken. But we accept that there's really no point complaining. How many times can you wait 30 minutes to be seated and they lead you to a sticky table that's had the last couple's food on it before you give up with complaining? And I believe that this conditioning of the British people in life to have such low expectations affects us on so many levels. However, right, and I want to be very clear, because there will be a lot of people watching this and being like, what the fuck, you talking so bad about British culture? We're not that bad. And whilst I would say this decline is happening in lots of places, I would say it isn't a full picture, right? Because if you look a lot closer, what is really happening isn't that British culture is in decline. What is happening is that it is shifting. You see, for all the pubs that are closing down because they can't afford to stay open, and as people have less and less money and they can't afford to go out and enjoy themselves as much, the more reduction of these third places, the less leisure time that British people have. I saw that the UK is ranked 34 out of 40 for work-life balance. As more leisure centres and libraries are shut down, many parts of the UK do just get left with, the McDonald's, the Tesco's and the betting shops and vape shops. But what has happened is that those high quality type establishments have managed to stay alive by targeting a different market: the rich.
Today we're eating at Michelin-star restaurants for 24 hours. Breakfast, lunch and dinner. We're even going to be going to a 3-star Michelin restaurant. And just to put it in context, there are only 10 in the whole of the UK.
I am telling you, right, high quality British culture has not disappeared at all. The market is simply shifted to these 3 different groups: the wealthy, obviously, old people, and the hipsters. So we'll go through it, right? We'll start with the wealthy. If you can afford it, incredibly high quality British culture is alive and thriving, but it is just tucked away in the private galleries of Mayfair, Chelsea's fine dining rooms, and Soho's £300 a ticket theatre shows. British theatre, if you can afford it, is fucking incredible. I sunk £500 just trying to, for me to get to London to go see Moulin Rouge or one of these shows. And I was floored, man. It is incredible. And I noticed as I looked around at all the people there, you weren't seeing many people my age. You weren't seeing many people in tracksuits. You were seeing old rich people. Same for restaurants. If you want really high quality food and really high quality service, which I'll be honest is like the average standard in most affordable places in Southern Europe. But for that aside, yeah, you just have to pay £500 for a Sky Tower view in a restaurant in central London. This level of high quality modern British culture is very high. It's just completely unreachable by a lot of society. So what I would say is happening is that high quality service and culture is being increasingly concentrated to places that have the money to sustain it. The next group, I kind of mentioned them there because, you know, there's crossover here, is the elderly. I'm not gonna lie, if you go to one of these oldie-woldy towns, like these old quintessential British towns, they are absolutely beautiful. I noticed it when visiting places like Marlow-on-Thames, Amersham, maybe like Henley-on-Thames. There's clearly culture there, they're enjoying themselves. However, it's not very modern. A lot of these places you'll find that businesses are closed at like 3 p.m. closed on Sundays and Mondays. I've literally traveled 2 hours to one of these sorts of towns and I arrived at 3 and everything was shut. The food is nice, but it's like pub grub, like high quality pub grub, but you know, it's the same thing. And I would say cafes and tea rooms are where you can really see the age. Again, tea rooms are nice. You can have your afternoon tea. It's enjoyable, but it often feels very much like a remnant of the past. You have cafes and bakeries that have been selling the same fucking thing we've eaten for 50 years. There are things that exist other than Victoria sponges. I'm going to make some enemies in the comments here. I enjoy these things, but there's more to life, right? There's more things. We can try different stuff. Also very noticeable in a lot of these towns is just dog shit coffee.
Today, we're going to talk about how to complain in a coffee shop. You get served a cup of coffee that you think is bad, and you ask yourself the question, should I say something?
So yeah, as I say, nice to visit, but really to me, they feel like these sort of time capsules of culture. Areas completely built around old people whose tastes haven't changed in the last 60 years. And if you think about it, if you're a young person in one of these towns, you grew up there, they can be quite boring. And this actually creates this process that happens very often where the young people, as they get older, they move out. They go somewhere more modern. And so that brings us to the third category, the hipsters.
It's a beautiful day here in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. I'm Greg Berman.
I'm Neil Tafoya. And the hipsters are out in full force today to see which one of their own will take the prize at this year's Hipster Olympics.
The hipsters, right, Matt? I did a video a long time ago about the hipsters. I wish I knew more about it then. But I find the hipsters just the greatest, right? These are kind of like young, trendy people who want to go enjoy modern fashion, food, music, etc. But they tend to be the ones that are, you know, highly motivated and maybe a bit better off. And they are sort of forced to leave the hometowns, the places that they grew up in, and go to more cosmopolitan areas. They'll end up in places like Bristol, Brighton, Manchester, London. And it's these places, right, where you will see real high quality modern British culture. This is where you're going to find like innovative cafes that do new things that you've never seen before. Amazing coffee, locally sourced ingredients, keeping up with all the modern food trends. These are the places you'll see on your TikTok. Top 10 autumn date ideas in London. And the hipsters, man, they are doing the heavy lifting of British culture right now. Go to these like indie cinemas, indie theaters. I saw like a fucking outdoor free tango class in London when I was walking by the other day. And yeah, if the weather's good, you get your outdoor food areas. And also in the winter, you have these beautiful indoor arcades. Good music, underground comedy. These are places that are purely designed for the love of developing and sharing culture. That is it. And I would say what is most interesting is that they're often doing it against the odds. They don't have the money, the power, and the resource that these big chains have. They have to compete against them, operating with insanely high rent prices, energy prices, ingredient costs. And because of this, they often don't have the money to afford to stay in the prime retail locations like a Starbucks or a Costamite. So what tends to happen is they make their own enclaves quite far away from these prime retail spots in cheaper areas. And because they are so good, what they end up doing is actually raising the price of the area, the value of the land. Places like Shoreditch, Hoxton, in Manchester you got the Northern Quarter, Hackney Wick, Wapping Wharf. And I know, the names are ridiculous. And like these hipsters that go and make these areas cool as fuck, they then get fucking priced out of the area that they built because the property value's gone up. They can't afford to stay there. And so they start building all these high-rise flats, etc. And yeah, it's pretty unfair. The thing that they help create build is the landowners that tend to end up making the real money. But whilst this stuff is there, and it is fucking amazing, you have to realize that Britain is a big country. I mean, you zoom out of these small pockets where lots of people cluster and compare those areas to like wider British culture. A lot of places are nowhere near as nice as that. For a lot of places, it is just greasy spoon cafes, Weatherspoons, betting shops, or yeah, the older wealthy towns that are kind of stuck in the past. And I feel that, you know, these separations of, you know, life experience that people from these different towns live in, just how disconnected they are from each other, I feel that this separation creates tensions and division between these different sections of society. I think there probably is a feeling that exists in some of these more left behind parts of Britain that have had very little investment, where they can feel very disconnected from the lives of people living in cosmopolitan areas, the lives of Londoners. They feel left behind, forgotten, and sometimes judged by these people. That right there creates this tension. And as well, there's this massive generational tension between the older towns and the younger towns. I'm just gonna be completely honest, right? As a youngish person, I'm 30 years old, it feels in general, right? I'm being general and painting broad strokes. Not everyone's like this, but the older generation don't really like our culture. Gonna caveat that. I have met loads of old people that are very much appreciative of our culture, that engage with it. But I'm talking a general feeling that there is this generational disconnect. You know, you can see it in little things like, you know, when we complain about house prices, we are then often told that it's because we eat too much avocado on toast. There is a real disengagement for a lot of older people, even just people over like 45, 50, to embrace change. I mean, you really see it with that weird reaction to the proposal of 15-minute cities. People fucking lost their mind when people started suggesting that maybe we build our cities to be more walkable. You know, ones you would find in places like Denmark, across Europe, etc. These like walkable cities. Nice, right? It looks good. I want a bit of that. No.
Creepy local authority bureaucrats would like to see your entire existence boiled down to the duration of a quarter of an hour.
You in your area will only be allowed within that 15-minute zone that you've been allocated.
Will the leader please set aside some time in this House for a debate on the international socialist concept of so-called 15-minute cities and 20-minute neighbourhoods?
Often when new ideas are presented, instead of like engaging with the idea, it very quickly becomes this weird generational culture war. And like, I know I think the media plays into it, but I do think there are structural reasons for it. I have noticed in places in like Southern Europe, this might be true in like Scandinavian places also, but I definitely noticed it in Florence. You'll see like old geezers just hanging out, you know, maybe playing cards or something, and near them might be students just drinking a bottle of wine. You'll find these artisan shops, like maybe some old lady making some jewelry or something, and then you'll also find hipster like Gen Z kids making some pop-up shop. And again, it's very tough when you visit places as tourists to know if this is real life or not, but I would just say I noticed this general vibe that there's a lot of generational connection in these towns, which likely keeps a feeling of community. Whereas here in Britain, there's a real separation of different age generations, if you think about it. And what tends to happen, even in wealthier towns that have some money, is that there's no young blood that stays in those towns to bring it into the modern day. They become these old time capsules. And I think it's sad, right? Because it creates this sort of lack of cultural exchange between the generations. And ultimately, I believe it builds a general resentment between these two groups of people. Old people looking down on the young as lazy and not working hard enough to afford a home, and young people looking up at old people like they're stuck in the past and bigoted and they don't understand the struggles of the modern day. And it's not like people are just specifically choosing to move apart. This is like an economic reality. As Britain continues to get more unequal, as the working class, the middle class, and local councils lose their wealth and go increasingly into debt, the wealth concentrates in the hands of the very wealthy, and so too does the entire economy. Jobs and opportunities become regionally concentrated in areas where the wealthy are. So the hipsters have to go to London, because if all the rich people in Mayfair and all the big banks are in London, your only way of making money is by selling to the wealthy, or at least selling to someone who works for the wealthy. You want to be selling coffee to the guy that works in the bank. And this has probably always been true to a degree, but in the past, wealth was more equally spread out across the country, creating more opportunities in different places, which in turn created more opportunities to develop culture all around the UK. But yeah, as you see more of these sort of like post-industrial towns and all this kind of decline, the only cultural businesses that tend to be able to survive there being the big chains, McDonald's, the gambling shops, the Costas, the Starbucks. Over time, if you think about it, those town centres degrade so much that they end up just not being a place that anyone wants to really be. But luckily, thanks to the miracle of capitalism, if you live in a shit town, you don't even need to leave your house. McDonald's can
Last year, there were more than 50 vacant shop units. Since then, some have opened, but others have closed.
But along this promenade, there are empty shops. There's one here, another one here, there's one down there. So the big question is, can the town recover, or will Dunstable die?
Like, I saw it with the town I grew up in, right? It's called Dunstable. It used to look like this. It had this massive local market, local traders. It was very popular. This meant that money was moving all around the economy. Other businesses thrived off of it. And then Asda comes and approaches the council and says, how about you get rid of that market and we just slap a fuck off Asda in the middle? Free parking. That Asda basically destroyed the entire town. They beat them on scale, they beat them on efficiency, convenience, and the town has struggled ever since. This was a town that used to have big music venues. All of that got shut down. And it's just become one of those boring, shitty towns, right? That everyone I knew who grew up there, every single person has left. But look, right, I go through all these things not because I want to just shit on the country, but because I want to make it better. And I do believe there are things that we can do to change it.
By carrying out free delivery, Amazon loses $3 billion a year globally. So it's quite considerable. That illustrates that the competition from independent bookshops to even larger literary department stores simply do not have the financial means to survive this kind of dumping.
Ultimately, we have to recognize there is an inherent value on thriving public areas, thriving local economies, and thriving culture. To have a thriving culture relies on a few important things. People, firstly, need disposable income. They can't be scraping the pennies if you want them to go out and enjoy themselves. Secondly, they need free time, like actual considerable amount of time away from work. And lastly, towns need protection from mass market capitalism. What really has set Britain quite far apart from a lot of places in Europe, Southern Europe, but also all these Scandinavian nations, is that we have allowed the ideology of free market fundamentalism to infect every fucking aspect of our lives. We see simply large, big business investment into the area, growth, high GDP, profit for big companies. We see that as a fundamental good without ever considering the cultural impact of that ideology. No one ever asked the question, should we allow unlimited KFCs and Starbucks? Yes, it's business investment, but is that a good thing? Do we want that? Ultimately, you have to protect your culture, your cultural offerings, social life, the public area. You have to protect it from giant chains, big corporations, and consumerism, extreme capitalism, because the biggest and most market efficient slop will win. And when they win, we lose our culture. And I never will buy the thing that it's about individual taste. British people just have bad taste. It's not that. Humans are very conditionable. And when starved of disposable income and free time, yeah, we will opt for the most cost-effective, efficient, cheap thing. But like, just think about it, right? I think we can all accept growing up and going to see Harry Potter in the cinema with loads of people. There was a cultural value to that, being excited about its big release. It was a shared cultural moment and literally physically brought people together. However, Netflix comes along. It was more efficient. It was quicker. Now, it meant that you didn't need to leave the house to enjoy your films. You could watch them on your own. And you know, if you're in an economy that's starving you of free time, and in a country that ranks 34 out of 40 for work-life balance, and a period of time where inflation and the cost of things are going up and up and up, and someone says to you, you know, you can go to the cinema, but it's going to cost you £40 for 2 tickets, and you'll get some popcorn that's been sat there for a whole day, and, you know, the film might be shit. For many people, a lot of the time, Netflix and a bag of sweets from Tesco, it'll do. But it doesn't mean it's better. It's obviously not better. And so you have to protect against these things. Like, just have a holiday. Go to Nice. Lots of the Scandinavian places too. Many of their towns are thriving and they have loads of culture still. And you even just see it in the city design, the architecture of these places. They are built to be communal. They're walkable. They have cheap, clean, high quality transport. And importantly, the government brings in protectionist policies to make it very hard for big corporate chains to consume them. You don't find Starbucks, McDonald's in these old towns. Like in many parts of France, areas will by law limit the amount of chain stores that are even allowed to exist. They fix it so Amazon can't sell books cheaper than physical bookshops. In many parts of Italy, they cap supermarkets. They have tight rules around branding in historic areas. Many of them don't allow these big fast food chains. Spain will do subsidies for local markets. A lot of these places will reduce the tax on local independent businesses so they see that there's a cultural value in. They try to give them as much of an ability to compete against these big chains because they realize the cultural and long-term value of these things. Meanwhile, yeah, in Britain, for a lot of it, we have done the opposite. We went down the route of deregulation, the building of out-of-town retail parks that just literally hoovered up high street customers for free parking and a conveyor belt of shit brands. And as well, we taxed independence to death. And when it comes to cultural spending, the UK has the lowest spend in all of Europe. And with the austerity cuts, we cut art funding by 30%. Our films, our artists, our musicians that are some of our proudest cultural exports, we cut that.
Unfortunately, it's quite difficult to put a figure on how much money creativity makes for society. In the British government's now failed struggle to hang on to its AAA credit rating, local authorities had their budgets cut dramatically. Newcastle has even toyed with the idea of cutting its arts budget completely.
And like on this topic of stagnation, we don't just see it in our culture and our economy, but we also have seen it in politics and like ideas. My generation, we grew up in the 2000s, right? Where life was pretty good for ordinary people. Things were improving. And then like the financial crash happened. And when we became adults and entered the adult world, Brexit was happening. So for me and a lot of my generation, our entire adulthoods has been this story of like politicians and the media obsessed with Brexit and immigration. And 12 years later, my entire adult life, what has been achieved? Nothing. We're poorer. It feels like we've spent the last decade arguing about who should and shouldn't be allowed in Britain. And honestly, just my perspective as a 30-year-old, it really feels like the elders of society, like the leadership of society, they had a pretty good life, right? And they have decided, as they've got into the age of leadership, to use all of our political energy to obsessively focus on this one topic of immigration. And increasingly, as time goes past and they continue on this topic, I feel like my generation, we're being dictated to about what British culture means by, quite frankly, people who aren't going to be as affected by the consequences of their decisions. And it feels like our entire generation are just being ignored. No one consults with us. They don't ask us what vision of Britain do we have? How would you like British culture to change and evolve? This growing movement of sort of anti-immigration, they rarely ever ask us why we like multiculturalism. They never wonder why. What is it that we've liked about growing up like this? They just tell us we're all wrong and continuously vote against anything we want. And it's weird, like we always hear about this topic of patriotism. And sometimes I don't know what it means anymore. To me, patriotism is the young generation going out, trying to make something new, progress our culture, build local businesses. It's the immigrant groups coming in and also sharing their culture with us, proudly and happily. They want to be a part of building something together, something positive, something new. But instead, it seems like patriotism has become wrapping Union Jacks that were made in China and bought off of Amazon around a lamppost.
I tell you what it is. It's fucking beautiful. It's absolutely fucking beautiful.
And going to a rally and shouting to send people back home. Kemi Badenoch waving a Union Jack and singing Sweet Caroline for a TikTok clip.
Sweet Caroline, up the books, the times never seem so good. So good, so good, so good.
It's embarrassing. We've become a parody of ourselves. A shallow culture who's unsure of who they are or where they're going. Desperately trying to hang on to the past, reluctant to change. Acting like some washed up rock star who wrote a hit song when he was 20 years old and is still touring at 70. I want you to look at these images, right? These pictures right here. These were images that were made in the 50s, 60s. This is how they pictured the future. And that was the thing. It was common to think about and imagine a future. Do you ever see politicians these days suggesting what a vibrant future Britain could look like? Somewhere along the way, I feel like we stopped imagining the future. I posted this image a while ago. I apologize for the AI slop. But I just had some ideas like of what Britain could look like if we built things a bit differently. Like a sort of futuristic Britain that still took notes from the past and our traditional beautiful architecture, but just modernized it. Trams, walkable cities, beautiful gardens, commissioning local graffiti artists to make murals. And I know our weather sucks, but imagine like arcades that were always heated all year round by green energy. I saw this video about the country of Bhutan, a country I'd never heard of, and they're trying to build this sort of mindful city.
This is a bridge?
This is the bridge that is also a kind of Buddhist center.
Oh.
This is a healthcare bridge. It actually has healthcare facilities on either side of the road. This is a university bridge.
All built with local materials. This will be the downtown. No skyscrapers.
And you see these images, and you also see images of all the stuff in like the Scandinavian nations, building these incredible public places. I mean, even China, to give them credit, they make things that are amazing. Things that are built around community, art, and culture. And I just felt like, man, imagine our politicians talking and thinking like that for just 5 minutes. You know, you can yap about your migrants on the boats, all the welfare scroungers, but just for 5 minutes, we just imagined something that wasn't shit. And I've increasingly come to accept, I do not think that our current leadership, that entire class of people, they're not going to do it for us, right? So I think we have to do it ourselves. A few months back, I joined the Green Party. Now, I'm not being paid by them, Zach, if you wanna. But I cannot lie, the recent growth and success of what Zach is doing with this very simple message of hope and optimism, they've grown from like 60k followers in a few months to 90,000. I'm just gonna put it out there, I think we should join them. If we have big, grand ideas, we can vote them through as members. So you can do what you want, but that's where I'm going at the moment.
Ordinary people can't wait any longer. I'm here to make this call, but I can't do it alone. Will you stand with me? Let's bring back that feeling and make hope normal again.
If you enjoy this video, be sure to support me on Patreon. It massively helps. As these videos get longer and complicated, it costs a lot of money to make. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.